What it do? Welcome to another one for Al Cuerpo Boxing, to the body. So let's get with it. Let's talk some boxing. So we are about 21 or 20 days out from the mega fight, Canelo Alvarez versus Terrence Bud Crawford, right? September 13th, Allegiant Stadium, live on Netflix for everyone. And most of you guys got Netflix, right? So that's good. That's a win for boxing. That's a win for boxing globally. And it's all good, right? And so right now, there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of hype regarding the Ennis photos in camp these last weeks, in camp with Canelo Alvarez, right? And what we do know about sparring, right, is, well, obviously you want to get the best work. You want to ideally choose sparring partners or a sparring partner that can mimic the rebel you're going to face, right? And what's even better is when we're at the elite high level of boxing, right? 2 pound for pounds, Canelo Alvarez and Terrence Bud Crawford. You always have to ask yourselves, and I always say this too, how do you prepare for a guy like Canelo Alvarez, right? How do you prepare for him? Realistically, what sparring partner, what pros at the high level and pros in which you can afford that can mimic the ring IQ of the undisputed champion Saul Canelo Alvarez. All right. So even for practitioners, guys that are in boxing, guys that are shadow boxing, day in day out, gym rats, right? When you envision what it's like to be in there with the Canelo Alvarez, the heated pressure gets in your mind mentally, right? You don't want to make mistakes. You don't want to make mistakes with a guy like Canelo Alvarez. Same thing goes with Terrence Crawford, right? You know, you can mimic what it would be like to be in there with Terrence Bud Crawford. Mean guy. He's a fighter. Terrence Crawford is a natural born fighter, just like Saul Canelo Alvarez, right? But again, let's focus back on the sparring at the elite level. Guys that can afford expensive partners that can mimic either fighter, right? Be it Canelo Alvarez or Terrence Bud Crawford. And the thing is that, and I'll get to Stephen Edwards in a bit, because Stephen Edwards, there's a video where he has his opinion on this channel, YSM Sports Media. It's a really good interview in which Stephen Breadman Edwards, again, former trainer of Julian J. Rock Williams, right? Julian J. Rock Williams from Philly, former super welterweight champion, right? Beat Jarrett Hurd. And then later, Stephen Edwards migrated to Caleb Plant, right? Also former champion at 168. The fight in which he had to, coach Plant to beat Canelo Alvarez for the undisputed crown at super middleweight, right? So go ahead and check out that interview now, and I'll talk about that one in a bit. But going back to sparring, and by the way, this relates to what Breadman Edwards is saying, because in that interview, Breadman Edwards kind of shifts more towards, cryptically, in my opinion, Breadman Edwards is kind of cryptically leaning towards Canelo Alvarez. He's not saying it like that. By the way, in that interview, Breadman Edwards is choosing um, Terrence Bud Crawford to still win the fight. That's nothing new, by the way, because even Breadman Edwards obviously was going to pick Plant to beat Canelo Alvarez, right? As a matter of fact, guys, Stephen Edwards had picked Plant. Before Stephen Edwards was hired by Caleb Plant, Stephen Edwards had said that Plant is the type of guy to beat Canelo Alvarez. As a matter of fact, even Andre Ward had said that, right? It's what we're getting at. And by the way, go ahead and check out Tim Bradley's YouTube page, right? He recently did a video in which he's now changing the vibe in saying that, because initially Timothy Bradley said that Terrence Bud Crawford was going to destroy Canelo Alvarez. Literally, Tim Bradley was notoriously known for saying that a couple months back. if that, right? I don't remember how long ago he said that. But just recently, in Tim Bradley's upload on Canelo versus Crawford, he's kind of now saying, yo, Crawford's got to watch out for Canelo Alvarez. So you see kind of like a switch in energy. Why? You gotta ask yourselves why. Maybe Tim Bradley behind the scenes knew about Jaron Boots Ennis in camp with Canelo Alvarez. Why is that important? Because Tim Bradley wanted Terence Crawford to fight Jaron Boots Ennis. Tim Bradley kind of insinuated, he had some criticism on Terence Bud Crawford going to 154 when he should have stayed at 147 and fought Jaron Boots Ennis. Now think about, why would Tim Bradley want that? Is Tim Bradley acknowledging how good Jaron Boots Ennis was at 147? Is Tim Bradley saying that Jaron Boots Ennis was possibly a threat to Terence Crawford at 147? Maybe, right? But now let's go back to my mode of thought as far as the sparring, right? So I always ask, and I always ask this to a lot of cats, how do you train for a guy like Canelo Alvarez, right? You're going to go in there with Canelo Alvarez knowing Canelo is a massive puncher. Canelo's proven to fans that Canelo's got dog, right? Canelo will prove to fans that he can go to toe-to-toe, phone booth fights with opponents. Even though you want to laugh at a fight like John Ryder or a fight with Kirkland. I mean, there was even moments where Canelo was, close in there with Bivol, man. Dimitri Bivol. Way bigger guy than Canelo Alvarez and a 175 pounder, right? So think about that. Your mental ambition, your motivation is, I'm gonna go in there with Canelo Alvarez, but, and this is me being Terence Crawford, right? But who's gonna prepare me for a guy like Canelo Alvarez? Now, right now, it's said that Terence Bud Crawford has closed the doors for his camp, right? So we don't really know much what's going on behind the scenes or behind closed doors in Terence Crawford's camp. Whereas with Canelo is kind of more open. Canelo's always been like that. I mean, Canelo leaks out sparring videos. He shows things, right? So Canelo is more, how would you say, liberal. Team Canelo are more liberal in showing things to the public, all right? Whereas right now Crawford isn't. Why is that? Maybe Team Crawford, they don't want to disclose who they're using in camp for Canelo, or maybe they don't want any distractions outside. Maybe Team Crawford, they don't want any secret agents invading the gym. There could be a lot of reasons why, right? But most likely because they want to stay focused exclusively in their team prep up, right? So from what I gather, from what I've seen, they've got guys like Steve Nelson and let's say Lester Martinez in camp, right? And if I'm not mistaken, Lester Martinez is part of this card on September 13th. Now keep that in mind, guys. Why I find that a bit odd. Sorry for saying this, guys. Why I think it's a bit commercial, if you ask me. It's a bit commercial. Some might interpret that as maybe this fight isn't really serious. I wouldn't say so much of a joke, but why it's not serious. So check it out, right? Let's imagine we got Steve Nelson giving that work to Crawford and Lester Martinez, who also needs to prep up, right, in this fight. Though Lester Martinez is going to fight Christian and Billy, right? And Billy doesn't fight like Crawford. But let's say that Crawford and Lester Martinez are getting in that work, right? They're getting work. They're prepping up the points, the knowledge, the moves, the mimicking. Even though, in my opinion, it's very hard to mimic Canelo Alvarez. Name me a fighter that can, in the comment section, really, name me a fighter, and you've got the money, that can mimic Canelo Alvarez. Yo, in this round, I want you to do this. I want you to sit on this punch. I want you to do this sequence, right? Keep in mind how complicated and difficult it is to control that quality control. Quality control. It's hard. At the same time, you don't want to mistakenly or accidentally hurt Terence Bud Crawford, right? Lester Martinez knows this. Steve Nelson knows this. Any other sparring partner that's mimicking Canelo knows this. Aside from getting paid, we need to conserve the date, guys. We need to conserve September 13th on Netflix. So what you don't want to do is accidentally hurt Terence Crawford in this process, right? That would be disastrous. It would be disastrous if Crawford were to get hurt in this camp. And guys, this happens a lot in boxing at the highest level. These things happen. A fighter gets injured, he's out, and we get replacements, right? So think about how much buildup there's been for Canelo versus Crawford, right? For more than a year, there's been a massive buildup. So we have to be very, very careful in conserving Terence Crawford for September 13th. That's the realistic business perspective, right? Because I think Turkey likes Crawford. Turkey needs Terence Crawford. By the way, Turkey, you need Gervonta Davis. Tank Davis versus Jake Paul is a joke fight. But anyways, Turkey needs All-American stars to represent Riyadh season, to represent the geopolitics, to represent Saudi Arabian sports washing. Turkey Al-Sheikhs needs All-American stars. The last great American boxing star, one of which is Terence Bud Crawford. At the same time, Turkey, Riyadh season, they need Canelo Alvarez to push their agenda too. It makes good noise. It makes good metrics. It makes the Saudis happy, right? So going back to September 13th, insecurities, the conservation of Terence Bud Crawford to make sure he goes in the ring 100%, you got to be careful with Terence Crawford. Forgive me for saying this, but you kind of have to go light on Terence Crawford, right? If Terence Crawford is getting bigger guys to mimic Canelo Alvarez, then we need to be careful with not hurting Terence Bud Crawford, right? And unfortunately, in my sincere opinion, and most of you would agree, even industry would agree, Steve Nelson and Lester Martinez and others, whom we probably don't know, they can't mimic Saul Canelo Alvarez. They can't mimic that ring IQ. They can't mimic that power. All right? The head movement, the defense, the intuition of Canelo Alvarez, right? Canelo Alvarez is a bad man. That guy is dangerous to fight. You make the wrong mistakes, boom, you're going to get clipped. You make the wrong mistakes, you're going to get clipped. So now let's go to Canelo Alvarez, right? My bad. Look like the suspense is brewing, right? Because what about Jaron Boots Ennis? Now here's the flip side. And this is why a lot of industry are hyped up. They're hyped up right now because low key they're hyping up Boots Ennis. Maybe they're thinking, damn, Boots now got Canelo Alvarez. Maybe this is good also for Jaron Boots Ennis in his trajectory from 154 to 160, right? Maybe some hardcore fans of Boots like this exposure, right? But more important, let's go back to the sparring and mimicking. Now, Jaron Boots Ennis has more ring IQ. He's got a bigger pedigree. And in switch hitting in general, Jaron Boots Ennis has more mimicking benefits, advantages for Canelo than what Steve Nelson or Lester Martinez has for Terence Bud Crawford. All right? The difference is, too, is that now Stephen Edwards, he had said that, you know, it's he's in awe that in this late days, weeks leading up to Canelo Alvarez, that it's a ballsy and gutsy move from Team Canelo to use a guy like Jaronennis because Canelo could, in theory, also get hurt, right? Which is probably true. But to be honest, it takes a lot to hurt Canelo Alvarez. At the same time, Canelo Alvarez doesn't want to hurt Jaron Boots Ennis in his particular sequences in rounds. Who knows how long they've been using each other. But at the same time, if Canelo Alvarez wants to take advantage and benefit from Jaron Boots Ennis, he also has to go light on Jaronennis. And rightfully so, right? I mean, Jaronennis is in a lower weight class. Canelo could hurt Jaron Boots Ennis, and you don't want to do that, right? You don't want to hurt Jaron Boots Ennis where Jaron's instincts can't be shown to mimic Terence Bud Crawford, right? So Canelo knows that. The camp knows that. Reynoso and Boots' father, they know that. So what they do is they do a quality control to get the best out of Jaron Boots Ennis, but at the same time, not do stupid things in sparring. Okay? But back to mimicking, guys. Jaron Boots Ennis has the ring IQ, the athleticism, guys. The switch hitting athleticism from Jaron Boots Ennis is a lot better than what Terence Crawford Camp has to offer as far as mimicking opponents, right? If we tell Jaron, yo, in this next round or in this sequence, can you switch up on here? I want you to use a power jab. I want you to use a mean right power jab the way Errol was doing. I mean, the way Bud was doing against Errol Spence. Even unfortunately, I mean, I have my opinions on the Terence Crawford versus Errol Spence fight. You guys know me; I'm hardcore on that criticism. I don't think that was the best. I mean, whatever. Forget Errol Spence. Maybe I'll use a different example. But let's say Jaron Boots Ennis completely in southpaw, and then let's mimic Jaron Boots Ennis in trouble, hurt, and goes orthodox. We want you to mimic that for Canelo, so that way Canelo can get kind of like a taste. All right. But that, I mean, this is interesting, guys, and I think that's why guys like Stephen Edwards and other industry are kind of going crazy as of late with the Jaron Boots Ennis leaks, because again, guys, Jaron Boots Ennis has higher probability to mimic Terence Crawford than the other guys like Steve Nelson and Lester Martinez trying to mimic Saul Canelo Alvarez. It's like it's day and night, guys. The athleticism is day and night. Okay? And keep in mind, again, going back to respect Jermel Charlo, sorry, former undisputed, right? Super welterweight champion at 154. A Jermel Charlo who's proven to be a dog in fights. Go and watch Jermel Charlo highlights. When he bites down and he wants to get into fights, Jermel Charlo is a mean dude. He's a mean guy. Believe me, man. Fighting Jermel Charlo in sparring is also no easy task. I'd actually like to see Virgil Ortiz versus Jermel Charlo. That'd be a good fight. Hopefully we can get that fight. I don't really follow much of Jermel Charlo right now if he's active, but I would like to see Jermel Charlo back in the ring. Maybe even at 160, actually. Go and fight Ennis Lara, Janabek, or Carlos Adames. Please, Jermel, get back in the ring. So those are the revelations, right? And what's cool about sparring, man, sparring to me, or even let's say shadow boxing. Shadow boxing represents like the allegory of the cave, if you guys know that, right? Plato, platonic form, right? So in any scenario, be it Crawford or Canelo, when you're imagining your opponent, all right? When you're imagining your opponent, that's different than when it comes down to a real fight. That's the allegory of the cave, right? And Canelo Alvarez just has more experience being in with bigger guys, right? So back to what Breadman is saying in his video about sparring sessions, right? And keep in mind that what I know from, like, let's say the snack world, right? Be it Caleb Plant, Danny Jacobs, they have prepped up, or let's say even Demetrius Andrade prepping up for Benavidez, right? The snack camp. What we do know is sometimes when you overtrain, now here, check it out like this. To fight Canelo Alvarez, in theory, you gotta overtrain harder than you ever have to dethrone Canelo Alvarez. If you want to go into a dog fight and prove to the world that you're gonna slug it out with Canelo Alvarez, you gotta overtrain hardcore. Can Snack do that? Can they provide it? I think they can. I hope they do. But at the same time, will it have a negative effect on Terence Crawford's body? Adding more muscle mass, right? Is Terence Crawford gonna be slower? Most likely, yeah, right? Realistic that happens. Is he gonna be slower? Is he gonna carry that 147 or 154 power up to 168? Is that power gonna rival the experience in which Canelo took firepower from Bivol, Kovalev? Danny Jacobs, even though Danny Jacobs was at 160. But again, guys, I'm talking about snack. Caleb Plant. This Caleb Plant and Terrence Bud Crawford, do those balance out 50-50, right? If they do, if you say a 147 and 154 Terrence Bud Crawford is the same thing as a 168 full size Caleb Plant, well, if that balances out, then again, that's more in favor of Canelo Alvarez. Why? Because Canelo Alvarez beat Caleb Plant and he has that experience. Defended his belts against Jermel Charlo. Defended his belts against bigger guys like Berlanga, Jaime Munguia, John Ryder. Again, guys that are proven dog fighters, right? John Ryder, who some people said gave Callum Smith a very tough fight, right? Even some fans had said that John Ryder beat Callum Smith. A John Ryder that beat Danny Jacobs. All right? So I'm thinking, damn, you know what? What if what like Caleb Plant was saying is true? The reason why Caleb Plant didn't fight Canelo Alvarez after that fight, the Vincent Feigenboots episode, right? Oh, I overtrained. Canelo's crazy if he's thinking I was gonna go in there next. Come on, guys. The greats of the past. You know, maybe Sugar Ray Robinson versus Jake LaMotta, right? I believe they even had a fight in between where it was like 3 or 4 weeks out, right? We're talking about legends here. Of course, Sugar Ray Robinson and Jake LaMotta, it's it's not a Canelo Alvarez versus Terrence Bud Crawford, you know, pound for pound situation, right? And no disrespect to the greats of the past, but again, we're talking about fighters making excuses to not dare to be great. Caleb Plant, who says I overtrained. A Caleb Plant who overtrained using snack to fight Canelo Alvarez. A guy who trained under the wing of Breadman Edwards to fight a Canelo Alvarez. Again, overtraining, right? So now here we got Terrence Bud Crawford, who, in theory, you also want to overtrain to withstand the pressure, right? The peak level of endurance, performance, athleticism, right? At the peak, at the highest level to prep up for Canelo Alvarez. While at the same time, you got to make sure you don't take erroneous techniques in sparring and not get hurt with guys like, let's say, Steven Nelson or Lester Martinez. And again, back to what I'm saying from the beginning, we got to conserve the date. We got to save the date. We got to make sure Terrence Bud Crawford comes in 100% on September 13th. Why? Because that's what the Saudis want. That's what the Saudis are selling to the public. They want to sell an all-American great. The last great American representing boxing, Terrence Bud Crawford, has to come in 100%, unscathed, in sparring sessions against Canelo Alvarez. And as we see, Terrence Crawford's camp, with whom I believe they are, I want to say they are nervous, man. Nervous because there's a lot of things at stake here, right? Riyadh season saying they don't want no Tom and Jerry. Damn, I mean, think about that, guys. I need to prepare for Canelo Alvarez, but I have to be limited to Tom and Jerry techniques, right? Now that's on Bud if he wants to go against that or acknowledge that, right? We heard Bud in the presser say, I'm not going to let nobody dictate to me how to fight. I've been doing this since I was a kid. Fair play to Terrence Bud Crawford. But fans have seen, you know, boxing evolve upward on criticism on styles of fights. A la Devin Haney versus Jose Ramirez, for example. As an example, Canelo Alvarez versus William Skoll, for example. So right now, think about the judges. Think about even the analysts, right? Andre Ward, Antonio Tarver, Mark Kriegel, Kellerman. They've all heard these narratives about Tom and Jerry fights. And they've all given respect to the Saudis in Turkey al-Sheikh. Have you guys heard from these greats of the past, these former champions, right? Have you heard them have a criticism on what Turkey al-Sheikh wants, right? Would they risk going against the grain with their opinions while at the same time being employed for a re-season event. So you have to wonder, are the analysts, the hosts for this event, are they pro-Turkey narratives, or are they pro-Crawford narratives, or are they pro-old school, let's say 5 years back narratives? You got to think about that, right? An Andre Ward, who's been very critical of Canelo Alvarez's career as of late. Ever since Canelo beat Sergey Kovalev, Andre Ward has been critical. Andre Ward has told the public in interviews that Canelo Alvarez got to show me something that he can beat a guy like Terence Crawford. Or let me say it differently. Canelo Alvarez hasn't shown me, and again, I'm speaking as Andre Ward, Canelo Alvarez hasn't shown me that he can beat a guy like Terence Bud Crawford. I find it a bit weird, right? So let's wrap it up, right? Jaron Boots Ennis, a guy who, if when you pay him well, damn, and Jaron Boots Ennis probably getting paid well. Shout out to the Ennis family. Jaron Boots Ennis, who's super athletic. Jaron Boots Ennis is nice, a nice switch hitter. Jaron Boots Ennis is probably the only guy in the game who can mimic Terence Crawford when you tell him what to do in this sequence in between these rounds, right? We're all in agreement to that Jaron Boots Ennis can do that. And keep in mind that Canelo also sparring bigger guys throughout his career, prepping up for bigger guys, okay? So keep this in mind. Let me end it with this. It's saying that Breadman Edwards said it depends on how hard these guys train, right? In cap, at the highest peak level. So again, Canelo Alvarez has been sparring guys bigger than him. Let's say guys like Vosdik, for example, prepping up for a Dimitri Bivol, fighting guys like Frank Sanchez, all right? How do you prep up to fight a guy like Callum Smith? How do you prep up to fight a guy like Sergey Kovalev, right? So Canelo has this saturated experience, along with him having a granite chin, a serious puncher, great head movement, great upper waist movement, great footwork. Let's say a la Danny Jacobs' performance, all right? Or if you want to go rudimentary, if you want to go old school, rudimentary, Canelo Alvarez versus John Ryder, which in my opinion was more of like a lazy performance to give the Jalisco crowd a throwback fight. Let me repeat that. Canelo Alvarez in Jalisco fighting John Ryder. Because look at guys, we all know this. Mexicans and Mexican fans, Mexican boxing gets criticized for being rudimentary compared to slicksters, right? So the last thing that Canelo Alvarez wants to do is give a slick performance in Jalisco against John Ryder, right? Shane Mosley disclosed that. And I've been saying that, guys, that you got to give fighters benefit of doubt, that they can choose how to fight in a fight. And we're talking about like styles. Canelo Alvarez has the poise, the ring IQ, the athleticism, the intellect and intuition to choose how to fight differently in various fights. The same thing can be said with Terence Crawford. But when we talk about Terence Crawford, and again, Canelo Alvarez asked Terence Crawford, name me elite fighters that you faced. Did Terence Crawford mention former 154 champion Madrimov? Did he mention Errol Spence in the pressers? And I've had opinions about this before. I won't go over it now. But think about that, guys. Is Terence Crawford trolling? Is Terence Crawford or is Terence Crawford, did he feel under pressure in front of Canelo and the crowd and the public, a live audience? Excuse me. Was Terence Crawford trolling to only mention Ricky Burns and Victor Postol as the only elite level fighters that Canelo's asking him directly? For me, I find that awkward. And again, I'll use the word commercialism. Are the Saudis really giving us more of a commercial fight? Not an underground fight, but a commercial fight. For me, underground would be like Canelo versus Dimitri Bivol rematch. Let's say a rematch at 168. That's an underground fight, guys. You know what I'm saying? And so what is Canelo versus Terence Crawford? Now, the good thing is that industry fans, they've done their part to sell this fight. So to many, Terence Crawford is the goods. Terence Crawford is the real deal, right? Terence Crawford, should Canelo Alvarez beat Terence Crawford, and I believe he will, is it going to justify Canelo Alvarez's reign on the pound for pound list throughout the years? Is it going to justify that? I think so. Look at the face-off, guys. It's not Canelo Alvarez's fault that Team Crawford are finally moving up to 168, because I've said before, Terence Crawford could have already been a 160 middleweight champion had he already acclimated years' time, right? Terence Bud Crawford's been a welterweight champion since 2018, guys. 2018, that's 7 years ago. Do you guys think that Terence Crawford, in between 2018 and 2020, that Terence Crawford saw the opportunities at middleweight, super middleweight? If Terence Crawford thought he could have beaten a Caleb Plant or a Callum Smith, he would have already done that, right? Think about that, you know? Or maybe Terence Crawford, they could have sent an offer to Gennady Golovkin for a 160 middleweight fight, right? Why do that notoriety? Why? Because it even brings the Canelo Alvarez fight, right? But they weren't thinking they weren't thinking like that back then, right? So again, guys, commercialism in boxing. That's why when I say that Crawford's doing this for a nice bag, a lot of fans get offended by that. I'm thinking the opposite. I'm thinking by design. By design, Terence Crawford is probably going to be very careful in this fight. And if I wanted to make a mockery of Saudi sports washing, throwing away money stupidly, and that's not a knock on them, by the way, pay me too, and I'll do what you want, right? But if you're gonna splurge on stupid spending, I'll play the part. I'll play the game. You know, I'm gonna support my family with generational wealth, and I want more fights for myself. And I'm speaking the perspective of Team Crawford, right? You don't want to make mistakes with a Canelo Alvarez. Damn, my bad. I ran out of disk space. Ran out of disk space on this MacBook. So, anyways, I apologize for that. By the way, I got to stitch this back together. So again, let me conclude, and I apologize if I already said I was gonna conclude this. But again, I think right now where we are with Jaron Boots Ennis and Canelo Alvarez is gonna probably put a bit mental pressure on Team Crawford. And as Breadman Edwards said, go ahead and check out that interview on YSM Sports Media. Breadman Edwards said, if I were Team Crawford, I would have paid Jaron Boots Ennis to step aside and not do any work with anybody. Right? That's crazy. Breadman Edwards had a very good point, right? Of course, Terence Crawford wouldn't. Don't get confused, guys. That doesn't mean that Terence Crawford would use Boots Ennis as a sparring partner to mimic against Canelo Alvarez. No, Breadman Edwards is staying straight up. Pay Boots Ennis to just stay out of the game for the next upcoming weeks, or I'll pay you to not spar Canelo Alvarez if you're asked. I mean, strategically, that's how you would say it. That's how you would say it. But anyways, thank you guys for tuning in on this one for Al Cuerpo Boxing, to the body, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.